What happens when a four-time world champion says he can't trust his own car, and then every other driver starts saying the same thing? Because in Suzuka, something unprecedented just happened. Max Verstappen, dominant for years, eliminated early, and then openly admits he cannot attack, cannot push, cannot rely on the car. But here's where it gets serious. He wasn't alone. Within minutes, multiple drivers from completely different teams started exposing the same issue. Cars losing up to 50 km per hour on straights. Power disappearing without warning. Races being decided by energy systems, not driving. And one driver said it in the clearest way possible. This is no longer pure racing. At the same time, fans around the world noticed something strange. Clips going viral. Cars slowing down at full throttle. Overtakes that didn't make sense. And suddenly, the question everyone is asking is the same. Is Formula One still about the driver? But here's the part that changes everything. This isn't just frustration. This is the beginning of something much bigger. Because when the best drivers in the world, from rival teams, all agree on one problem. That's not a complaint. That's a revolt. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why Suzuka might be remembered as the moment drivers finally pushed back. Subscribe now, because this story is only getting started. Before the revolt became visible, it was just one voice. And that voice was Verstappen. Not shouting. Not dramatic. Just consistent. From the very beginning of the season, he kept pointing at the same issue. The car doesn't behave naturally. The performance isn't in his hands. Something feels off. At first, people didn't take it seriously. Because when you dominate for years, any complaint sounds like frustration. Like expectation. Like a driver not used to struggling. But that assumption didn't last long. Because race after race, the same pattern kept repeating. Australia. A strong recovery drive. But instead of satisfaction, doubt. China. Performance drops. Frustration grows. And then comes Suzuka. And everything changes. Because this time, it's not about results. It's about what he feels inside the car. And what he feels is a lack of control. He says the car moves in a way he cannot trust. That he cannot attack. That pushing the limit is no longer possible. And that's the key moment. Because in Formula One, everything is built on trust. Braking at the limit. Turning at full commitment. Accelerating without hesitation. All of it depends on one thing. Knowing what the car will do. And when that disappears, the driver stops being a driver. He becomes reactive. Careful. Limited. And that's exactly what Verstappen is describing. But here's where the situation starts to escalate. Because other drivers are listening. They're watching. And more importantly, they're feeling the same thing. Not identical symptoms. But the same root problem. Unpredictability. Energy systems interfering with performance. Cars behaving differently, lap to lap. And suddenly, Verstappen is no longer alone. Because when one driver complains, it's an opinion. When multiple drivers say the same thing, it becomes a pattern. And in Suzuka, that pattern became impossible to ignore. But here's the detail that makes this even more powerful. These are not midfield drivers. Not rookies. Not outsiders. These are champions. Race winners. Drivers from top teams. All pointing in the same direction. And that's when the shift happens. Because now, it's no longer about one frustrated driver. It's about a group. A shared understanding. A silent agreement that something is fundamentally wrong. And once that kind of alignment forms in Formula One, it doesn't stay quiet for long. Because drivers might compete on track, but off track. When something affects all of them, they start to move together. Not officially. Not publicly organized. But clearly connected. And Suzuka was the first time that connection became visible. Because what started as one voice is now becoming many. And when that happens, the conversation is no longer optional. It becomes pressure. Real pressure. On the FIA. On the rules. On the future of the sport itself. And then, it spreads. Not loudly. Not all at once. But clearly. Because after Verstappen speaks, the rest of the grid doesn't push back. They don't disagree. They add to it. And that's when it stops being one perspective. And becomes a shared reality. Lando Norris is the first to shift the tone. He doesn't sound emotional. He doesn't sound angry. He sounds analytical. But what he says is just as serious. Performance is no longer about driving. It's about energy management. About who controls the system better. And that's a problem. Because Formula One has always been complex. Always technical. But never at the cost of the driver's influence. Now, that balance is starting to disappear. And drivers can feel it. But then comes something even more revealing. Because the criticism evolves. It goes deeper. Fernando Alonso doesn't talk about lap times. He talks about behavior. About what the driver is actually doing inside the cockpit. Looking down. Managing numbers. Adjusting settings. Instead of focusing on the track. And that changes everything. Because now, the problem is not just performance. It's experience. What it means to drive these cars. What it feels like. And whether that still matches what Formula One is supposed to be. But here's where the tension reaches another level. Because not every driver is suffering the same way. Some cars handle the system better. Smoother deployment. More predictable behavior. Less extreme power loss. And others struggle constantly. And that creates something dangerous. An imbalance that drivers cannot fix. No matter how good they are. Because you can adapt to a car. You can adjust your style. You can push beyond limits. But you cannot override a system. And that's what frustrates them the most. Because now, their performance depends on something they don't fully control. And when that realization settles in, the tone changes again. From frustration to concern. Even George Russell, who is benefiting from a strong package, admits it doesn't feel right. Seeing cars lose speed suddenly feels unnatural. And that word matters more than anything else. Unnatural. Because Formula One has always been extreme. Fast. Unforgiving. But never unnatural. The driver always knew why the car behaved the way it did. Now, sometimes they don't. And that uncertainty is what connects all of them. Different teams. Different results. Same feeling. And that's how a revolt begins. Not with shouting. Not with protest. But with agreement. Because once drivers start seeing the same problem, from different positions, they start trusting each other's perspective. They start reinforcing the message. And that message becomes stronger with every interview, with every statement, with every race. And now, the FIA is no longer dealing with isolated complaints. They are facing a unified concern. One that is growing. One that is spreading. And one that cannot be ignored for much longer. Because when drivers reach this point, they don't go backwards. They push forward. And what happens next is where things stop being controlled. And this is where everything crosses the line. Because until now, it was still manageable. Drivers complaining. Teams adjusting. The FIA responding, slowly. But after Suzuka, something changed. The tone is no longer controlled. It's no longer careful. It's direct. Because now the drivers are no longer just describing the problem. They are rejecting it. Max Verstappen makes that clear without needing to raise his voice. He doesn't ask for improvements. He doesn't suggest solutions. He states the reality. This is not what it should be. And when the most dominant driver of the last years stops trying to adapt, that's when the system itself is being questioned. But here's where the pressure really starts building. Because this isn't happening behind closed doors. It's happening in public. Interviews, press conferences, live broadcasts. Every word reaching millions. And every word reinforcing the same idea. This is not just difficult. This is wrong. Now think about what that means. Formula One has always evolved. New rules. New eras. New challenges. Drivers adapt. Teams catch up. The sport moves forward. But this time, drivers are not just struggling to adapt. They are questioning whether they should. And that's a completely different situation. Because once that doubt exists, you cannot solve it with small changes. You cannot fix it with minor adjustments. You need something bigger. And the FIA knows it. That's why they acted before Suzuka. Reducing energy limits. Trying to stabilize the behavior. But here's the problem. It didn't change the core issue. It only exposed it more clearly. Because even after the adjustment, cars were still losing speed. Still behaving unpredictably. Still forcing drivers to manage instead of attack. And that's when frustration turns into something stronger. Disbelief. Because now drivers are asking a different question. Not how do we improve this, but why is this happening at all? And that question is dangerous. Because it goes beyond performance. It challenges the design of the rules themselves. The philosophy behind them. The direction of the sport. And once that conversation starts, it doesn't stay technical. It becomes political. Because now teams are involved. Manufacturers are involved. The FIA is under pressure. And every decision carries consequences. Not just for this season, but for the future. And here's the part that makes this even more intense. The fans. Because while all of this is happening inside the paddock, outside, millions of people are watching the same thing. Cars slowing down on straights. Drivers unable to push. Moments that don't make sense. And they are reacting. Clips going viral. Debates exploding. Questions spreading everywhere. Is this still Formula One? And that question is the one the sport cannot afford to ignore. Because drivers can adapt. Teams can evolve. Rules can change. But once fans lose belief, that's much harder to recover. And now everything is connected. Drivers pushing back. Teams searching for answers. Fans demanding clarity. And the FIA trying to hold control. But control is slipping. Slowly. Quietly. But visibly. Because Suzuka didn't just reveal a problem. It revealed a divide. Between what Formula One is. And what it's becoming. And if that gap continues to grow, then this revolt won't just be remembered as frustration. It will be remembered as the moment the drivers stopped playing along.